Hey, and welcome back to Kampai Kitchen. Today we're going to be making one of my favorite dishes and one of the first Japanese style dishes that I ever took a lot of time to research and really get as good as I can at, and every single time I'm still getting better, so don't worry if yours doesn't end up perfect. This is going to be my ramen recipe. And yes, this ramen recipe is going to take you about 8 hours to complete if you do it the full way. I have done it in as short as 3 or 4 hours before. However, your end flavor is going to be a little bit different than this full recipe. I've already done some prep for this recipe. Last night I took and soft boiled some eggs because we're going to want that beautiful tamago on top of our ramen bowl. And recipe on this one is really simple. Get your pot of water boiling, pierce the fat end of the egg, and lower them in. I use a little strainer just to make it a lot easier to get them in and out, because you're gonna wanna put them in, start a timer for 6 minutes, and bring them out right at 6 minutes. And as soon as they come out, put them in an ice bath. Cool them down, stop that cooking process. You're then gonna peel them and put them into a container. And we're gonna pour over them our tare sauce, or tare as it looks like it's red, but we're gonna say tare for this whole rest of this thing, but just know that it's written with an R. And tare is a Japanese traditional sauce, and it's very simple to make. Everybody has their own recipe, but it has 4 major items: soy sauce, sake, mirin, and sugar. And mirin is sort of a sweet cooking wine, but it's more on the edge of the sweetness than any sort of cooking wine that I've dealt with in Western cooking before. And I use a recipe at this point that's 1 to 1 to 1, sake, soy sauce, and mirin, and then just a little bit of sugar. I think in this recipe I'm using about a 1/4 cup. I think I even went a little light on that. I don't like my tare overly sweet. I prefer them to be saltier, and adding the sugar is just gonna help us make it into more of a glaze. And so that'll be good when we get to our next cooking process that's gonna utilize the excess tare that we have. Now we also want our eggs to be completely coated. We're not gonna have any Achilles out there that have part of them that haven't been soaking. So what we do is I'm gonna take a lid from a mason jar, wrap it in a paper towel, put it in there, and this is gonna help add a little bit pressure, and the paper towel will soak the tare sauce up to actually fully coat my eggs. Really wanna get them nice and soaked and full of flavor. And our eggs are soaking in that, and they've been soaking overnight, and so they'll be ready the next day. You can keep the eggs in the fridge for about 3 days. I wouldn't keep them any longer because they are extremely soft boiled. When we cut these open tomorrow, I'm hoping to have a nice creamy yolk that just kind of spills out a little into the ramen. Should be gorgeous, should be beautiful. So to start with, we're gonna make our broth, and our broth has a bunch of factors. The first factor is our dashi, and I'm using a different sort of dashi than I've previously shown before. This dashi is actually going to be a mushroom dashi, and this one is super easy to make and super easy to keep on hand at all times. At a lot of Asian grocers, you're gonna find dried shiitake mushrooms. We're just gonna throw all of our mushrooms in a bowl, fill it with water. I'm gonna do that same concept that we used for the eggs, except without the paper towel, where we put a smaller lid into the container with a little bit of a spacer to help push all of the mushrooms down into the water, because I don't want any dry sections of mushrooms when we go to actually use the mushrooms in the final dish. And we're just gonna let this soak overnight, and then when we pull this out, this is gonna be sort of the equivalent to what we'd get if we let the kombu soak in it, where it's pulling out a lot of those really good umami, earthy, just delicious, that salty richness flavor is gonna come out into that broth, and that's gonna bring itself all the way through when we're finally done adding all of our good pork flavors to it. As for the pork, we are working with 2 feet and 2 ham hocks. And they've already been sliced. I can pick these up at our local Wajimaya, already done like this. If you can't, you go to any butcher, ask him for pig's feet and ham hock, and get them sliced. Anywhere from 1 inch to 1.25 inches is gonna be okay. And we're gonna start by blanching these. I actually use a pasta strainer just because it makes it way easier to pull them out after they're done blanching, and I don't really wanna cook them at all when I'm doing this. And that's gonna be simply done by laying them in the pot, filling it with cool water, bringing it to a boil, and as soon as it's boiling, we're gonna pull them out of there, throw them in the sink, and start removing all the blood vessels, because we want a thick white tonkotsu style broth, not a dark blood meaty sort of broth. You'll know by the end if you get an overly brown and dark broth. It'll still be delicious, it'll still taste good. It just won't have that milkier consistency that we're gonna get by removing the blood and then going with just the fats and the collagens that are in the feet, the muscles, the bones, and the tissue here. And because this is an 8-hour meal and it's still morning time, we're actually gonna start our kanpais off with a nice cup of coffee and we'll see where it goes from there. Kanpai.
Kanpai.
All right, so that came to a boil, so we're ready to throw it in the sink and get started pulling out all the little bloody bits and little brown bits and anything that we don't want to colorize or kind of add too much of that iron flavor to our final product here. And once we get all those bits pulled off that we want to, we're gonna layer them in our stock pot, pour in some water, and get the stock rolling. Let's grab ourselves another kanpai so we can have steady hands while we try to remove all these little bits from our meat. Kanpai. All right, so now we've got our pork feet and ham hocks in our water. Now that they've been cleaned, they're gonna start boiling. We've got it about twice as high as the level of the hocks and feet, and we're gonna be adding water to it anytime it kind of comes down a little bit. We're also gonna add to that a chicken carcass, and you can get these one of two ways. Sometimes you can buy them in a store because they've boned them and they're using them for other dishes, and then they just sell the bones in the carcass so that you can use them in soup stock like we're about to do now. Or you could buy an entire fryer chicken, take off all the little bits and pieces that you're looking for, and then use that carcass, throw it in the freezer for a rainy day, just like today when we're gonna throw it in this nice old stock pot. So now it's time to get our aromatics ready to get into the broth to help add a few more extra flavors and notes that'll hit your nose and tickle your toes. And for our aromatics, we really just have a bunch of onion type items. We have an onion, which is an onion. We have a shallot, which is like an onion and a garlic made a weird baby. And we have a leek, which is like an onion and a green onion made a bigger, greener, bigger onion.
Daddy green onion.
Daddy green onion. And we just give those some really nice big chop, 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 because we're gonna just peel the skin and throw them into our pan. Now it's important when you throw these into your pan that the pan is already hot, because you really wanna just sear them, give them that nice real quick Maillard, and then get them into the stock pot in the end. We're not looking to cook down our onions or anything. So starting from a cold pan, you're gonna end up with some pretty soft onion, whereas we just wanna crisp that end and get it in the pot. Now that all those guys are in there, you know what time it is. Kanpai. Now some of you are wondering, wait a minute, didn't you say you were making dashi out of mushrooms? Why isn't that in the pot? So the reason we didn't put the mushroom dashi in the pot is because this pot is going to keep evaporating and keep boiling itself down, and we're gonna have to keep adding liquid to it. The liquid that we add is gonna be that mushroom dashi, because I wanna make sure that we keep as much of that good rich mushroom dashi flavor in the pot and not evaporating away. So we want all of that umami to stick around. So let's separate off our mushrooms and see what we're left with. So we're going to be opening up our container here, and then let's siphon this out so we don't get any of the little bits of mushroom. And I'm actually gonna use this drop lid to press down on the mushrooms so I get a lot of that moisture out of them, squeeze them like a little sponge out of there. And this process has now left us with two things. A mushroom dashi that's gonna be an amazing addition to our soup base to help bring a lot of those earthier umami tones out, and a big old bowl of reconstituted mushrooms. And while that may sound really terrible to a lot of people, these things are delicious. They are a little bit stronger than a fresh mushroom, so when we pan fry these later, they're gonna really hold their texture and hold their shape, and it's gonna make a really good addition to our final ramen toppings. And now we're ready for the longest part of our cooking journey today. We've got all of our aromatics, our pork and our chicken carcasses boiling away. We've got our mushroom dashi that we're gonna be adding as it boils down. And we want this to sit at a nice kind of rolling boil, a little bit hotter than a simmer, and going to just really kind of keep a semi-loose eye on it, stirring occasionally. This is gonna take us anywhere from 5 to 8 hours at this point. It's really up to you how much of that flavor you wanna pull out, how thick of a broth you want. The longer you go, you're gonna get more of the fats in the final dish, which I think makes a much better ramen overall. They really do carry a lot of the pork flavor into your final product. Anyone familiar with French broths where you're skimming away the top little bits anytime something boils to the surface? We are not gonna do that. We're just gonna be leaving this guy on high, stirring it to make sure we don't burn anything on the bottom of the pan, but for the most part, just letting it boil away for the rest of the day while we add our mushroom dashi to it. So we'll see you in 5 to 8 hours. Kanpai. We've transitioned ourselves to one of my favorite sakes, Tanuki sake from the Hakushika Brewery. From the Hakushika Brewery. And this is one of my favorite sakes. I love the ones that come in a carton because they're so much easier to pack and ship over. You can actually get a lot of really decent Japanese sake in America that comes in cartons. So don't be scared to grab a carton. It may look cheap, but they're still delicious. So let's give ourselves a nice kanpai.
Kanpai.
Kanpai. So we're gonna get started now that we have about an hour left on some of our fresher ingredients that we're gonna wanna put as toppings. We've got our carrots, our green onion, and our enoki mushroom. Now the enoki mushroom, we're gonna do the same exact prep where we just cut off the dirty bits and then break them off into about 1-inch chunks. The green onions, just slice them real thin and we're gonna dust them on top at the end. And then our carrots, we're gonna have a little more fun with. So come on in and see what I do. We're gonna start very simply by peeling the carrot. Some people will slice their carrots up and then use cookie cutters to give them a fun little shape. I found you can use the little bit on the end of most peelers that is designed to pull eyes out of potatoes to run it along the length of the carrot, and then when you cut your carrot, you'll have a little bit more of a fun shape to eat. I'm gonna finish cutting up these carrots and these enoki mushrooms, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna really quickly blanch them in some boiling water, because we just wanna really bring that raw edge off of them. We wanna give them a little bit of cook so we can get them into the final noodle bowl. People aren't chawing on a raw vegetable. However, these will cook when they are in the ramen. We just don't want them to be super raw when someone goes to take a bite early. So before I finish all my vegetables, let's have another kanpai together. Kanpai. And while we wait for the water to boil, we're gonna slice up our mushrooms and get them ready for the final dish, as well as pull out our meat. So we've got our big bowl of rehydrated mushrooms, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull these babies out and we're gonna give them nice, long, lengthwise cuts. And these are going to do a couple things. They're gonna be a lot easier to eat when they're in these longer slices, and when we fry them up in a pan with a little bit of tare, they're gonna get a nice saltiness to them. So we're gonna have a nice contrast all the time of like a little bit of salty and a little bit of sour and a little bit of fatty and a little bit of salty, and that balance in the dish is what's going to let you eat an entire bowl of ramen and then later on go, oh, that was so much food, it was so good. So for these mushrooms, now that I've got them all sliced up, we're going to throw them in our pan and we're going to crank this up, throw these in here, blah 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 blah. We're gonna get this cranking, and we've got that tare sauce. So soy sauce, sake, mirin with a little bit of sugar that we've all put together. Some people like to add garlic to theirs or chili paste. You know, it's really kind of up to you. I like to leave mine a little more on the just straight up soy, sake, mirin, and let other people add the heat or the garlic if they want to. So let's pour some of this in here. And then once I'm done cooking these guys, I'm gonna pull them out, set them in another dish waiting to be plated, and we're gonna throw the meat into that same exact pan and cook that up, and same idea, have it just ready for the final bowl. Ramen's kind of a fun one. Like, you just get to kind of pick what you wanna put in and out of your dish in the end. And I can see our broth is starting to get a little low again. So what we're gonna do is we're going to add a little more water to that again.
How much water was it?
Basically what we're trying to do is keep it at about the same level that we started at, and by continually bringing up the water while it cooks down, it's continually forcing it to pull more and more material out of the pork. More and more of that collagen and that fat's gonna have to come out into that fresh water, and so we're gonna get much more of the flavor out of just those 2 feet and 2 ham hocks than we would have originally if we had just let the whole thing boil down into a concentrate. Now for our meat. Now the meat, like everything else in this dish, is sort of up to you. So it's based on a lot of personal preference. And our local Asian grocer, Wajimaya, also has pre-made chashu. Chashu, I always hate how to pronounce it. It's like a Chinese word that is then used by the Japanese.
Charshu.
Charshu, but like ours or chachu. Yeah. Anyway, I like myself some thin sliced beef because when I'm eating my ramen with some chopsticks, I can pick them out and they're nice and bite sized. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw this into the pan with some of that tare sauce because we like that little bit of saltiness. It's gonna bring a lot of good flavors out of the meat. And with that, our meat's done. We're just gonna set it aside and let it stay warm in that pot. Because when you put it into our ramen, it's gonna finish cooking. And there's one thing I hate, it's overcooked meat. I think we've earned ourselves another kanpai. Kanpai, friends. So that you know what you're looking for, here's a sample of the ramen that I pulled out about 2 hours ago. It's still a little runny, and that's not quite what we want. We want it to really congeal and stay almost like a jello when it's in the fridge. And don't be fooled. When you first put it in and that top layer starts to harden, it's gonna look like jello, but as soon as you stir it around a little bit, you're gonna see that it actually is still dripping and kind of not jello. So when you see this consistency, you're about 2 hours away. Now we're gonna season our ramen. I know what you're thinking. You're like, Blaine, but we've got so many things going already. Why is it just now that you're seasoning? Because ramen is made from two styles, the broth and the seasoning. And the seasoning is the flavor that you put in your bowl, and the broth is your design on the broth. So we're going with a tonkotsu broth. You could also do a fish-based broth, a vegetable-based broth. There's a number of different types of broth that you can make. I like that milky white tonkotsu. And then when I season my bowl, you can use soy sauce, you can use miso, you can use just some salt, some shio is what it's known if you ever go to Japan, you want to try some salt broth. There's a bunch of different ways to bring out and enhance the flavors in the meat, because if you just had a scoop of this tonkotsu broth the way it is now, it would be very bland, very porky, but very bland. And so what I like to do is a nice healthy dose of miso, some soy sauce, and then a little bit of garlic, because I like it to have that little bit of garlic flavor coming through in the end. And I'm gonna use a fresh pressed clove, because fresh garlic's gonna give me the best garlic taste that I can find. I don't know why I grabbed this, but I did.
Inconsistency.
So for one bowl of ramen, I'm gonna put in a healthy teaspoon of miso paste. I actually am using a darker miso. You can use kind of whatever flavor miso that you want. It's really up to you. Try it, see if you like it, and then move on from there. I also do like to add a little bit of soy sauce to mine, so just so that I can break up and stir up that miso and thin it out a little bit before the broth goes into the bowl. Just about a half teaspoon there. Now I always love garlic in my meals, but I didn't know how great it would be in ramen until we went to a little back alley ramen shop called Bankara Ramen in Akihabara. And they had an entire basket next to the table just full of raw garlic and a garlic press. So you could add as much or as little garlic as you want to your final dish. I was like, that's amazing. I want garlic in every bowl of ramen I'm ever gonna eat. So I keep doing it. So I'm just gonna mash this all together. Now, actually serving the ramen is kind of one of the most terrifying but also fun parts. We're actually going to use a small pot as our ladle because we need to get a lot of it, and we're gonna pour this through a handheld strainer. The bigger you have, the better. You can find these again in most Asian grocers. Mine is really tiny because I could not find my big one in our basement. So hopefully you won't see me spill any of the big chunks out of this. You need to be able to smell this because as soon as I put that warm broth in there, that garlic smell just exploded out of the bowl and just is amazing. Amazing. That's another kanpai I think we've earned ourselves just for that smell alone.
Yeah.
Kanpai. But I know what you're thinking, like this is ramen. We've got a bowl, we've got our toppings, it's got broth in it, but where are the noodles at? Let me tell you. We buy these noodles, yakisoba noodles. You can find them frozen in most Asian grocers. I'm sure you can even find some yakisoba noodles in QFC or Safeway. Maybe even a Ralph's if that's what you find in your location. And what I found is that the frozen yakisoba noodles are the closest to a fresh noodle that I've been able to find without having to make my own noodles, which would just add so much more pain and time to all of this. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna crack these open, throw them in a nice sieve, and block them in the water. Once we get them to that kind of texture we want, we're gonna pull them out, give them some shakes, make it in a sink or back into the pot, and pour them into our final bowl. Now, we've been to Fukuoka, and in Fukuoka, they have noodles based on their firmness. However firm or soft you want your noodles is gonna dictate how long you leave them in the boiling water. A real quick dip is gonna give you a nice firm noodle, whereas leave it in a little bit longer, that's gonna be a nice soft noodle for you. Now, the Fukuoka way, where they invented tonkotsu ramen, is the firm noodle. So we're gonna go with, what is it, Takai? How do I say it? Our water's just now boiling, so let's get this baby cracked open, get our noodle pouch in here, and let's get it in the water. All right, go in. I like to agitate it because they do come in those blocks, and by agitating, I sort of get to break up the noodle a little bit. But you can see already, it looks much more like a ramen noodle that you would be used to. This noodle shaking is the most fun part of being at a ramen restaurant. That's where you get to see guys that are like just swinging it for all they're worth, just swing it like their entire kitchen is getting sprayed with their ramen noodle water. It's just hilarious. But this is basically our ramen noodles. We got broth, we got noodles, we got flavor, and now the rest is up to you. So I'm gonna decorate it with all the stuff I like. The mushrooms, carrots, bean sprouts that I already showed you. I've got some menma, bamboo shoots. They're some of my favorites. However, it's sort of a build your own buffet once you've got it at this point. You've already flavored it and made a broth that you really like, so go crazy. Throw whatever you enjoy eating on top of your ramen. Let's take a look at my final product here. Okay, we forgot the best part. I'm so sorry. But the eggs that I've had soaking... Open! Oh, I've had eggs soaking in tare sauce overnight that are super soft boiled. We're gonna cut into them and see if they're beautiful and set them on our... All right, so we've got a drop lid in here that's keeping pressure on the eggs so that as my... these, I need to be gentle. Grab yourself a slotted spoon, put on some jazzy music, and pull your eggs out. Now the ramen is complete. And if you're ever at a ramen shop in Tokyo, always ask for that tamago. And if you're at a vending machine outside of a ramen place and you don't know what it is, you open that door and you say, tamago doko desu ka? Like, where's the egg, so that you make sure to order an egg for your ramen. It's the best. This is my last kanpai. I'm not sure if in the final edit this will end up being the final kanpai, but we're gonna give ourselves a tamago kanpai today. Kanpai. And that's how you make ramen. That's how you start early in the morning, make a broth, and then serve it for all your friends late at night. I recommend drinking a nice sake with this. That's been my go-to this entire day. Kanpai. But there are some people who do enjoy a beer with their ramen. Some of them, they're pretty weird people though.
What? Beer's the best.
You're going to make too much broth. And the broth can be sectioned off into gallon Ziploc freezer bags and saved for 3 to 6 months, maybe a year. It just kind of depends on what you're comfortable with eating. I have had old broth before and it still tastes pretty good. It does kind of lose some of its luster though after 3 months. I recommend anytime you make ramen, you bring as many friends over as you can to help you eat it all. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know what you build your ramen around, whether you go with the tonkatsu broth like me, whether you want beef on the top, or if you put miso and garlic in yours. We're all a little different, so we all like our ramen a little bit different too. And with that, I think it's time we enjoy this beautiful bowl of ramen, and we'll see you in the next one. Kanpai.